All right, let's talk Chelsea. Interesting start to the Premier League. I say interesting, it's been awful. The reason I said interesting is because I remember the first game, Liverpool, Stamford Bridge. I think Liverpool were lucky to get a point out of that game. I thought Chelsea played really, really good. And since then, it's just... I mean, you had that game where Sterling was lighting the place up and you thought, okay, maybe that was the kickstart. What's gone on so far this season for Chelsea?
I mean, we are totally all over the place. I think what happened against Liverpool was just that new season euphoria kicking in. I think Chelsea naturally raised their game for the visit of Liverpool, first day of the season, everybody up for it, new manager, and the tide had risen at Stamford Bridge for that day. However, let's remember there's such small margins here. Mohamed Salah had a goal that was, ruled out. It was a Rizzler paper offside. They gave it to him as being offside.
Should have been 2-0.
If that goes 2-0, Chelsea lose that game.
Yeah.
Since then, Chelsea have won one game. The only team that Chelsea have beaten are on course to be the worst Premier League team since Derby County in Luton. That's the only team that Chelsea have beaten this season. We are 11th in the league. This is our worst start to a season since 1995. We are completely and utterly all over the place. And the crucial part of this is that Chelsea have a really good manager. Yes. So what's wrong with the club?
And you spent like £1 billion in 2 windows.
But this is the problem. That's not a good thing. That you can...
No, but it's normally you spend $1 billion. Surely there's something, there's some good that comes out of it because there'll be good players for that.
That makes the equation too simple. I think what people do when they think about a good transfer window or a good owner, they think good owner spends money, bad owners don't spend money. That isn't the definition of being a good owner. Look, don't get me wrong. Being a generous owner, being prepared to replenish your team with finances, being prepared to put your hand into your pocket, being prepared to make big signings and put your neck on the line is all part of being a good owner. But so is making sure that the club is being looked after. So is enhancing the traditions of the club. So is making sure that the fans who go to the games are well catered for. Like the new ownership at Chelsea have, for some reason, scrapped subsidising away travel for fans. Like there is no cohesion between the board and the ownership. So, okay, they've managed to break their own transfer record twice in the same summer. Managed to spend hundreds of millions of pounds in one summer, but they won't spend 250 grand subsidising travel for fans. It's totally and utterly all over the place.
Backwards, isn't it?
And I don't really know what's going on at the club, but I would suggest that Chelsea are currently sleepwalking. We are sleepwalking into a crisis. Like, you look at the results, you look at the performances, only beating Luton. Only beating Luton, being absolutely destroyed by West Ham United away from home. It's so unacceptable. Losing to Nottingham Forest at home. And I don't mean that with any disrespect to Nottingham Forest, because they were far, far better than us, and Steve Cooper really got it right.
You should not be getting beat by Nottingham Forest.
Of course. We've had one clean sheet. We've had one clean sheet this season. That's just not good enough. So I think that the club is in a real state. And I think that the answer to solving this is discussing Todd Boehly. I think Todd Boehly and Clearlake and Egg Barley are a real problem to the club. I really do. And I think what they are trying to do is squeeze as much value out of it as possible, make as much money as possible, make the money that they have already invested in the club sweat until it can't sweat anymore. And while the motivation is money, the team are never going to excel.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So we're all over the place. I'm actually really worried because, at various other times under Clearlake, we've always been able to say that we haven't got a good manager. Like, you've always been able to argue that the manager's the issue. Whether you thought he was the issue or not, it had gone stale with Thomas Tuchel, and there was an argument to be made for moving him on. Whether you agreed or disagreed, Chelsea had just been battered at Ellen Road. We'd been battered at Southampton. Teams that went down. And some of Chelsea's worst results in a terrible season were actually in those first few games of the season under Thomas Tuchel. So whether you think he should have been sacked or not, there was an argument for it. We then brought in Graham Potter, who was totally and utterly out of his depth. He looked like a chancer. He looked like he didn't belong there, and we knew that was over before it even begun. We then had that chap Bruno for a game, who I vaguely remember, and we then had Frank Lampard, who, as much as I adore him, is limited at management. So you could always argue that what was going wrong at the club wasn't Todd Boehly. You could always argue that Clear Lake were doing their bit and it was a managerial issue. Now, we have Mauricio Pochettino in charge. We know, whatever you think of Pochettino, whatever scale you rate him on, you could say that he isn't necessarily the manager that certain people think. You could think that he's an elite manager. You could be wary of the lack of silverware that he managed to...
he's not a bad manager.
You know he's not a man. Even if you're slightly wary of what he achieved, and I use that in inverted commas at Tottenham, even if you're slightly wary of Tottenham, you admit that he's a good manager, and the fact that he is now struggling would suggest that there is an epidemic at Chelsea of failure, and I think it starts at the very top.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.